Good evening, and welcome to our Wednesday night study. And tonight, as usual, what we're going to do is give you some up-to-date prophecy in the news, and then we're going to go right into our Isaiah study after that, after a brief break. So let's talk about what's happening this week in the news. This one comes under the New World Order. Bracelets, beacons, and barcodes. Welcome to the new COVID-19 wearables. In their effort to contain the spread of the pandemic, governments around the world now are rolling out body-worn devices, or called wearables, to assist in fighting the virus. Some governments want a technological silver bullet to solve the public health issue. But many of the tools aimed at solving problems come with a host of other problems that will undermine the public health goals for which they are adopted and create new unintended consequences for privacy, association, and freedom of expression. So why would I bring you this article? Because these are all things that are dovetailing into control of a population. Obviously, the main issue here is not necessarily COVID. It's what continues after COVID is gone. Governments having more understanding of who you are, where you are, and what you're doing. It goes on to say this: these electronic devices are usually worn on the wrist or ankle. That should get you close to prophecy. Their use can be mandated by the government or voluntary, although users don't always understand exactly what they're being asked to wear. We might tend to associate the idea of a wearable with either a smartwatch or an ankle monitor, but governments are also using wrist-worn bracelets for a broad band of different purposes amid the COVID-19 pandemic. Wearables may use an electronic sensor to collect health information from the wearer by measuring vital signs and act as an early warning identity detector for COVID-19 patients before they show any symptoms. They can also be used to detect or log people's proximity to one another to enforce social distancing. Again, I'm going to stop as I'm reading this. I can't help but think about an Antichrist system where he can tell you exactly where you are at any given time. And remember, if he's hunting down people, which we know he will, there'll be many martyrs during the tribulation. If he's hunting down people, this gives him an edge, worldwide edge, to find out who is where and what they're doing. It goes on and says, and a bracelet that the person's own mobile phone or stationary home beacon will enforce home quarantine. So here it comes, the control of populations. How can Antichrist ever take over the world without a monitoring system? For quarantine enforcement, the devices might also use a GPS receiver to inform authorities of the wearer's location. I can't believe I'm even reading this to you. 5 years ago, this wouldn't even seem possible. Like other technologically deployed devices, they vary along several dimensions, including whether they are voluntary and whether the user has control of them, and whether they're used to surveil whether a person is doing and what the state told them to do, or merely providing the user with the health information to assist the user's decision making. So they come off pretty innocuous. We're going to help you with your health, but the ultimate goal obviously is nefarious. Early warning systems to identify COVID-19 patients. In Liechtenstein, it's a voluntary trial of 2,200 people are being given AVA, brand of bracelets to determine whether these wearables can identify COVID-19 pre-symptomatic cases. That means people that haven't had anything, they're giving them. I don't even see the logic in that. It says this: they're worn at night and record biometric data such as body movements, body temperature, blood flow, breath, and pulse rate. The clinical trial will study the biometric data to see whether an algorithm can spot indicators that a person might have developed COVID-19 symptoms, increased temperature, shortness of breath, and cough, even before patients notice these themselves. Listen, I believe that that's a lot of overkill, and I wonder where it's going. The study is government funded there. There's workplace monitoring of social distancing. Many employers are showing interest in making their staff wear electronic bracelets in the workplace, of course. Obviously, they may use the COVID-19 excuse, but they want to see whether they're on breaks. They want to see if they're getting their money's worth. Often to mitigate risks, it says, by enforcing social distancing guidelines. The port of Antwerp, Belgium, for example, has started to use wristbands to enforce social distancing rules on the work floor, requiring a specific minimum distance between any two workers. The wearables give off warning signals when workers come within a specified distance of each other. But enforcing social distancing is not the only function of the bracelet. Bluetooth enabled, they are also allowed for contact tracing, with all personal data collected for that purpose centrally stored at Rhombit servers. That's the maker of the device. There's a wearable device, proximity tracking. Reuters reported that the Singaporean government is switching its centralized contact tracing technology focus away from its existing Trace Together smartphone app, which is what they use with Bluetooth, Bluetooth to detect the close proximity, and they're upping it. Instead, the nation will deploy a new centralized trace token standalone wearable device, which the government plans to eventually distribute, listen to this, to all 5.7 million Singapore residents. That means they will mark every single resident of Singapore. The centralized tracer mobile app collects data that links device IDs to real contact information like phone numbers, which means the government can use it to determine which individuals have come into contact with one another. That's not the only thing they can say. Since the token will be a single-purpose device, users may not have the same amount of control over how it works. App users can always turn off Bluetooth on their phone, but they may not be able to turn off a wristband from broadcasting or collecting data. So you are known 24/7. Mandatory apps are wearable to monitor patients under quarantine orders. Some countries have started to make retractable wristbands or apps a mandatory element of their efforts to enforce quarantine orders of persons who are or might be infected with COVID-19. And if I could tell you anything as I read through this article, know that COVID-19 is only a catalyst to something else. It is a precursor to something else that's far more deadly and actually invasive. In Bahrain, for example, persons in medical isolation are compelled to download the government-mandated contact tracing app Be Aware, turn on Bluetooth, keep their internet on, and set their quarantine location. In addition, the government can request selfies at any time from the patient, clearly depicting both the isolating person's face and bracelet in the same image. Attempts to remove or tamper with the electronic bracelet, listen to this, can result in steep fines and imprisonment for not less than 3 months. Similarly, Kuwait requires individuals returning home from abroad to wear trackable bracelets. Some governments are turning to electronic ankle shackles, including Australia and 2 states in the United States, whether you know that or not. These devices are commonly used to monitor individuals considered to be dangerous and or a flight risk for both trial and during parole or probation. They have been repurposed for quarantine enforcement now. In Western Australia, under the state's COVID-19 Response Act, the police require 200 GPS-enabled ankle bracelets. Individuals who fail to comply with quarantine orders can be equipped with one of these bracelets. Penalties for failing to comply with orders to wear the shackles or attempting to tamper with them can lead up to 12 months in jail and fines of $10,000. Courts in Kentucky and West Virginia, you heard me right, Kentucky and West Virginia have mandated electronic ankle shackles for individuals who refuse to submit to quarantine procedures after testing positive for COVID-19. Like in Australia, the shackles are using GPS technology to locate individuals. GPS ankle shackles raise a serious question. They are a grave intrusion of a person's privacy and personal freedom. Often, they're uncomfortable. They restrict a person's range of motion, and they must be paid for by the person forced to wear them. Conclusion? Well, all of these surveillance technologies, like many other COVID-19 mitigations, are being rolled out rapidly amidst the crisis. While proponents may feel that they are taking an urgently needed step, governments must begin by showing the effect of such technology. History shows that governments rarely waste a good crisis, and that's what we're seeing here. And they tend to hold on to the new powers they seized to address the emergency situation. This thing will be with us forever. It should not feel normal to be tracked everywhere or to have to prove your location 24/7. Let me give you a couple other things that are going on tonight. So we talk about what's happening in the news, and specifically, on Black Lives Matter. And I know it's a controversial subject, but I want to hit it several places tonight because I don't think you're getting the full truth on it. Who is funding and leading Black Lives Matter? President Obama is off to Alaska to remain a mountain. Well, isn't that special? If the people of Alaska want it, well, then I'm all for their mountain. Of course, some rather important things have happened over the last few days. There was a deputy that was executed last Friday. Deputy Darren H. Goforth was married and the father of 2, age 5 and 12. Shannon J. Miles, 30, has a rap sheet of resisting arrest, trespassing, disorderly conduct with a firearm. Some minor infractions, but nothing like what he allegedly did when he walked up behind Deputy Goforth and shot him in the back of the head, and then stood over his dying body and shot him several more times. What was the motive? Well, the two had never met. The deputy had never arrested Mr. Miles. Why then would he do such a thing? Perhaps the idea was put in his head by what he saw on television, which brings us back to Black Lives Matter. In case there are people who don't know, Black Lives Matter is funded by George Soros. Soros supports Hillary Clinton and supported Obama as well. Soros also funded MoveOn.org. In fact, George Soros and the Clintons have a long and cozy history. In 1995 interview with Charlie Rose on PBS, Soros admitted how he controls politics in this country. Now listen really well, because we're getting down to the heart of what the matter is. how he controls politics in this country, or tries to, he said. I'm quoting, "I like to influence policy. I was not able to get George Bush, but now I think I've succeeded with my influence. I do now have great access to the Clinton administration. There is no question about this. We actually work together as a team," end of quote. So isn't that grand? We, the American people, had 3 presidents for the price of 1. Bill, Hillary, and the billionaire socialist George Soros' direct policy. Soros made it his life's work to defeat George W. Bush, and said he would give up his entire fortune if someone could guarantee, quote, that Bush would not be reelected. Almost sounds like he would pay someone to make sure Bush wasn't breathing long enough to take the oath of office. Of course, he would have fought any Republican nominee, as he is now. He can't control them like he does the progressive ones like Bill and Obama and Hillary. Then there's the open session on law enforcement that has been declared by Black Lives Matters. The group has been infiltrated and is perhaps taken over by the Black Panthers. You will see that with a raised fist. I remember it from the 60s. Which is a radical Muslim group, by the way. It was the Black Panthers, the Nation of Islam, and a man named Malik Zulu Shabazz, the head of the Black Lawyers for Justice, who organized the protests in Ferguson. A man from the Nation of Islam was there directing all of them and teaching them, quote, the art of war. 2 weeks prior to the execution of Deputy Goforth, the new Black Panther group held a rally in the exact county, Waller County Jail, where Sandra Bland committed suicide after being arrested for assaulting a police officer. She had been stopped on a simple traffic violation and became violent. Her family made no attempts to bail her out. She hung herself with a garbage bag. Believing foul play, this Black Panther group, dressed in military garb and heavily armed, began to shout, "The revolution is on, off the pigs, oink oink, bang bang." They also warned the watchful police that you're going to stop doing what you're doing or we'll start creeping up on you in the darkness. 2 weeks later, perhaps that is exactly what Shannon Miles did. He walked up behind a man in a police uniform that he didn't even know, shot him in the back of the head, and killed him. Now in Minnesota, Black Lives Matter is chanting, "Pigs in a blanket, fry them like bacon." A few weeks ago, Black Lives Matter was chanting, "What do we want? Dead cops now," in New York City. What we have is a violent group, the new Black Panthers, who have joined forces with the Nation of Islam to control this group called the Black Lives Matter, who claims they are peaceful, but their chants seem to say otherwise. Still, days later, there's no condemnation from anyone on the progressive side of the aisle. Now, again, I understand why people are trying to join Black Lives Matter, but understand what this group is before you don a t-shirt. Understand what they're about. Do your research. I have no doubt that Obama supports the Nation of Islam. So he will say nothing, or will say something is passing that will be said with a wink or a nod. Hillary won't say anything because she's owned by George Soros, who is funding Black Lives Matter, which I'll read to you in a moment. So the open season on our law enforcement officers will continue. And if anyone claims it is a black group behind all of it, they'll be shouted down as a racist. If anyone claims terrorism because they involve in a Nation of Islam and the Black Panthers, they'll be shouted down as hating peaceful Muslims. Islam wants a race war, and Black Lives Matter will be the vehicle they use. The Democratic National Committee voted to endorse Black Lives Matter. Pigs in a blanket, fry them like bacon. Pigs in a blanket, fry them like bacon. What do we want? Dead cops now. What do we do? Dead cops now. Unbelievable. All right, talking about George Soros, let me tell you exactly what's going on there. This is hacked documents, Soros funded Black Lives Matter. When George Soros Open Society Foundation, OSF, was accused last year of funding Black Lives Matter, Ken Zimmerman, the director of U.S. programs of OSF, flatly denied and claimed it was a fantastic rumor. Quote, "I can't really speculate on what leads to rumors, but this is wrong," he said. "I don't even know where one begins to reconstruct something like that." Well, earlier this week, hackers published documents which show that 2 months before Zimmerman's denial, the OSF board approved $650,000 to Black Lives Matter. The DCLeaks.com has published a 69-page report from OSF in which the Soros organization documents its plans to use the unrest, now listen, following the death of Freddie Gray, to accelerate the dismantling of structured inequality generated and maintained by local law enforcement. You know what that means? That means that they're looking for something to spark them to be able to go against law enforcement. The relevant portion of the report says this: the killing of Freddie Gray, of course this is before the recent killing, in April helped spawn weeks of peaceful protests by Baltimore residents and allies from the Black Lives Matter movement that were temporarily interrupted by a period of unrest that lasted less than 48 hours and resulted in some injuries and millions of dollars in property damage to neighborhood businesses. So let me update you. George Soros right now, that was in 2016, that he gave $650,000. The total to date, in 2020, he has given Black Lives Matter $100 million. There is a plot going on. Soros is behind the plot. As disconnected from reality as Soros and the company may be, their agenda is very clear. Avoid the obvious and seize the opportunity to foment revolution. Recognizing the need for strategic assistance, the U.S. Programs Board approved $650,000 way back when, and the Opportunities Fund to support and invest in technical assistance and support for the groups at the core of the burgeoning Black Lives Movement, right from their website. The decision to bankroll this subversive and violent anti-police organization was approved per board consensus, and appears to have had it as its goal the shifting of political power. Another leaked document covers a later board meeting and praises the success of the plan. Leaders of Black Lives Matter and the movement of Black Lives worked to influence candidate platforms during the 2016 primary season. This came alongside the recent acknowledgement by political strategists that African American voters may be much more pivotal to the 2016 general election than previously forecasted, obviously trying to block any Republican from winning that election. While Black Lives Matter could have used that $650,000 to actually improve the lives of Black residents of America's inner cities by initiating jobs, training, educational, and violence prevention programs, the money was used for its intended purposes, the fomenting of more unrest in the form of violent protests that were like more than staged riots, that were little more than staged riots. It's been successful in shifting political power. It has also undoubtedly fomented on the war on the police, leading to the deaths of police officers and Black citizens they work to protect. Let me remind you, some of those police officers are Black. So this Black Lives Matter is funded by George Soros, $100 million. When bricks show up underneath bridges to be thrown at police, someone's paying for it. When there's caches of arms that are showing up, someone's paying for that. When there's people being shuffled from one city to another, someone's paying for that. While inner city Black America continues to slide into the abyss, Black Lives Matter is a sugar daddy. George Soros are continuing to use that social decline to reshape America. Again, let me give you another one on it because this is all over. This is Soros Factor revealing in state attorneys' elections. Not only is he involved with Black Lives Matter and subversive groups, but he's involved in our politics to a big extent. Listen to this. It says, a conservative activist believes billionaire leftist George Soros is pouring millions into district attorney races in states like Virginia in order to provide potential cover for future perpetrators or voter fraud. And you can see that. We know that there have been hundreds of people that were arrested in New York City, but the DA in New York City, they were in the police station that night, and they were released. These are felons. These are people who have committed crimes, stealing. They have burned police cars. They burned buildings. How could they get instantly released? Well, listen to it. The media declared it a major victory for Democrats when they successfully flipped both states and the House of Delegates, giving them control of the legislature and the government's office for the first time in more than 2 decades. This is from Virginia, last election. And that's not all he's done to change America. Also on the ballot were 4 district attorney races in Northern Virginia that were won by Democrats as well. Those progressives, as they've been labeled, have promised major changes such as moving away from the death penalty, dropping prosecutions for marijuana possession, ending cash bail, and limiting cooperation with immigration authorities. Washington Times columnist Robert Knight, who resides in Northern Virginia, offers another reason why these elections result in 4 of the state's most populous counties should greatly concern the citizens of the Commonwealth. Quote, district attorneys have a big sway over criminal justice policy and legislation. They are key posts and they can interpret the law and decide what to prosecute and when not to prosecute. Given the amount of voter fraud going on in the country, he continues, I think this is all designed to ensure that when leftists steal votes and commit vote fraud, they're not going to face any problems from prosecutors. According to the Washington Post, the outcomes of 3 of the DA races were powered to a significant degree, I'm quoting, by George Soros, whose justice and public safety PAC poured nearly $2.1 million into the primary and general election campaigns of those progressive candidates in Fairfax, Arlington, and Loudoun counties. That report seems to validate Knight's concern about Soros influencing beyond Virginia. The spending was unprecedented in prosecutors' races in Virginia, part of an effort by Soros to tip prosecutors' offices to progressive candidates across the country. It was also controversial since opponents accused the recipients of being in the pocket of a billionaire with limited connections to Virginia. Soros also affected elections of his Democratic candidates for district attorney in 11 other states, maybe one of yours that you're listening to me. by his money. And that's why DAs across this nation are catching and releasing felons. So if you want to know the logic behind this, follow the money, follow the agenda. There is an agenda there. And again, everyone's shocked by the death of George Floyd. That's not even the issue anymore. The issue is what's going on right now. The issue is about dividing this country and getting it to a socialist agenda. We need to really start doing our homework before we take a side here. We have to understand, does prejudice exist? Of course it does. Is it as widespread as everybody would like you to think? I'm not really sure. But I'm going to tell you this, you deal with individuals, you don't deal with classes of people. It's individuals that either harm you or don't harm you. Individuals either nice to you or not nice to you. When you see these groups coming together and trying to subvert America, you have to really understand that there is an agenda here, and not to be lack in our education to understand what's going on. So let me give you another one that says, so amid Floyd chaos, a Marxist UN human rights boss targets the United States. You may not know who she is, but I'll tell you in a moment. The communists are back to their old tricks, this says, to destroy freedom and all who resist it. In recent days, United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights, that's what you're looking at, Michelle Bachelet, an actual communist, by the way, who defected to the brutal dictatorship enslaving East Germany, blasted the United States amidst protests and riots, painting the nation as a racist abomination in need of deep reforms to address structural racism. Exploiting the death of George Floyd at the hands of a Minneapolis police officer, the far-left un-human rights boss, a big fan of the late mass murder dictator Fidel Castro, made all sorts of demands too. Naturally, establishment propaganda outlets posing as news organizations around the world parroted the dishonest claims by scandal-plagued UN operatives, further tarnishing America's image abroad. She also demanded that the United States authorities bow down to the demands of the protesters. Listen, you bow down to the demands of the protesters and actually the anarchists, because this is no longer a peaceful protest, and thank God for the peaceful protests, but if you bow down to the anarchists and the ones that are committing crimes, you'll have anarchy in this country. And anarchy is exactly what's needed to overthrow a government. So listen up. Let me give you a little bit more things that are going on. This is also in the news. SpaceX. We've launched 32,000 Linux computers into space for Starlink Internet. Each of SpaceX's monthly launches of 60 internet beaming Starlink satellites carries 4,000 stripped black Linux computers, SpaceX software engineers have revealed. SpaceX engineers disclosed the detail in a Red Ask Me Anything session over the weekend. Elon Musk's rocket company last week launched 60 more internet beaming satellites into space on a reused Falcon 9 rocket, bringing its total count to around 480 and moving it closer to the 800 it needs to provide for moderate coverage over the United States. So what's going on here? Well, he has FCC approval to launch 12,000 satellites into space to cover the globe, totally encircle the globe, and bring in a new broadband internet to cover the entire planet. So again, when we're looking at something and controlling the planet and finding out information, this is another step up, a big step up, done by a private company to help control any type of internet access, and to have that strict user agreement that they would know everything about you. Let me give you a little bit of what's happening with Israel. Here's something you don't hear often. We know that Gaza and the Palestinians like to tell us that they're impoverished, and in fact there are parts that are impoverished, but they only want to give us one picture. Listen to this one. The Gaza Hamas does not want you to see. The Palestinian terror group Hamas has warned Palestinians in the Gaza Strip not to publish photos from the Gaza Strip on social media platforms. In June 9th statement, the Hamas-controlled Ministry of Interior claimed that Israeli intelligence agencies have been asking residents of the Gaza Strip through social media to use their mobile phones to take pictures of various places in the Gaza Strip. Hamas warned Palestinians against complying with the alleged Israeli request and claimed that Israel was using social media accounts to recruit collaborators and obtain information. Hamas added that its security forces were monitoring Israeli and Palestinian social media accounts and would take legal measures against any Palestinian who interacted with the purported Israeli intelligence agencies. Is Hamas actually worried that the Israeli security authorities would use the photos to recruit informants? Or is it that Hamas is worried that the photos and videos taken by Palestinians would reveal to the world the different reality of the situation in the Gaza Strip, a reality that runs contrary to all the stories of the images of poverty and misery and the suffering of Palestinians there? What Hamas seeks to conceal from the world are the shopping malls, the supermarkets, the fancy restaurants, the sleek coffee shops, and modern clothing stores that have sprung up in the Gaza Strip in recent years. Such images are excruciatingly embarrassing for the leaders of Hamas, who want to continue lying with impunity about Palestinians in the Gaza Strip suffering as a result of Israelis' blockade on the Hamas-controlled coastal enclave. Actually, Israel puts a whole lot of money into the Gaza Strip. These images are also embarrassing to anti-Israeli propagandists seeking to portray a completely different reality of life in the Gaza Strip as part of their campaign to delegitimize Israel and demonize the Jews by holding them fully responsible for the suffering of Palestinians. The Hamas warning came after several photos and video clips depicting the good life of many Palestinians in the Gaza Strip appeared on a number of social media platforms, particularly Twitter. One popular Twitter account called @Elshin has been disseminating videos, blog spots, and news from the world of the middle class and the wealthy of the Gaza Strip, and it never makes it to the mainstream media. A lot of the wealthy are part of Hamas. Relying on videos and photos taken by Palestinians, the account provides unique insight into the comfortable life of Palestinians in the Gaza Strip as they engage in shopping sprees and enjoy their outings at swimming pools, upscale restaurants, luxurious hotels, and beach resorts. On June 2nd, the account featured a post by the Royal House Chalet south of the University of Gaza, one of the most modern and lavish resorts on the Gaza Strip, fully equipped with an impressive swimming pool and a state-of-art suites. Another post features the Viola Restaurant Cafe, a popular spot in the Gaza port, famous for the variety of desserts and snacks. In other videos posted on YouTube, Instagram, and Facebook, the children of the Gaza Strip are documented purchasing mobile phones and enjoying the taste of various flavors of ice cream and slushies. Smartphones, including the iPhone 11, the most recent version of Apple devices, are available on sale in supermarkets throughout the Gaza Strip. You can't even get that in America. As recently announced by Metro Market, one of the largest supermarkets in the area. A few weeks ago, one of the Gaza Strip's fanciest shopping malls were inaugurated in Nuseirat refugee camp in central Gaza. The new Al Danaf Hyper Mall includes a large supermarket where shoppers can purchase various imported goods that are often not even available in Israeli markets. Earlier this year, Palestinians in the Gaza Strip celebrated the opening of the Dove Fox clothing store. The large store offers various clothing brands, mostly imported from Turkey and other countries. These are only a handful of images of the Gaza Strip that make Hamas nervous. How can Hamas continue begging for financial aid from the United Nations and other international humanitarian organizations when Palestinians are posting photos of families on shopping sprees and children eating ice cream and buying smartphones? How can Hamas and its supporters around the world continue to complain about the poverty and the misery when new shopping malls and supermarkets filled with clothes and various types of luxury goods are being opened every few weeks in the Gaza Strip? So, why are Palestinian journalists based in the Gaza Strip dumping photographic documentation on these sunny, positive developments in the Gaza Strip? Why aren't they? Why are they dumping them into the dustbin? It's because such images don't fit their anti-Israel narrative and agenda. The foreign and Palestinian journalists are complicit in Hamas cover-up. They want to continue blaming Israel for everything negative in the Palestinian encounter. Given the latest Hamas warning, it's only a matter of time before one hears about Palestinians being imprisoned or killed for betraying the Palestinian cause by posting photos of the Gaza Strip's newest version of the Ritz. So we're watching a double standard that's happening there. One that's wants to get the compassion of the world, but one that is also not telling us the truth. Let me give you a little bit more what's happening in Israel. This is despite Israeli strikes, Iranian forces massing on the Syrian border. Multiple drones reportedly belonging to the Israeli Air Force carried out a new series of airstrikes against the Iranian-backed militia in the area of Deir ez-Zur in eastern Syria over the weekend. The London-based Syrian Observatory for Human Rights reported that a total of 8 airstrikes targeted the Afghan Liva Fatimiyon militia, which was transferred to Syria on orders of Qassem Soleimani, the assassinated commander of the Quds Force of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard. So we're watching this entire battle start to come forefront. The attack, which killed 12 Afghan militia members, took place just before midnight on Sunday evening, destroyed recent fortifications and the Iranian weapon deliveries to the bases of Liwa Filimun and the Deir el-Zur province. As it continues to, another article, follow-up article says this: Iran prepares to confront Israel in Syria via Hezbollah. Iran may be preparing for conflict with Israel in Syria and no longer will accept Israeli airstrikes on its warehouses without a response. A report of the weekend suggests veteran journalist Elijah Mangier wrote on the website Medium about whether the Great Middle Eastern War will begin in the Levant. The Levant is the area of Syria, Israel, Jordan. So he's saying there's a war coming. We know that from Scripture. He says this. He says, citing Syria as a potential flashpoint, Manginer's report is interesting because he asserts that according to private sources, Iran is evacuating sites of the gatherings of its advisors, not for withdrawal or redeployment, but to find bases within the Syrian army barracks. Hezbollah has taken over the vacated Iranian buildings. Russia has been informed the change so that information would reach Israel. So what's going on here? Well, Iran has told Russia, so Russia could tell Israel that Iran is preparing and Syria is preparing to strike Israel. So again, another prophetic news article that's very close to prophecy. Matter of fact, right on the edge of prophecy. Let me give you a little bit about the economy, and unfortunately, it's not going to be something that you want to hear. 6-week countdown to more economic social chaos. Many of the emergency economic measures that were put into place to support the American people financially throughout this pandemic are about to disappear. And that means that big trouble is on the horizon. Right now, we are in the midst of the deepest economic downturn since the Great Depression of the 1930s. Economic activity has fallen dramatically. More than 100,000 businesses have permanently closed, and more than 44 million Americans have lost a job so far in 2020. Now let me just inject something right here. If we're talking about a plan and a social agenda, and we're talking about a leftist socialism, the only thing that's going to help that is if you take down the capital market. So as businesses, I'm giving my own reflections, so as businesses close, we realize that there'll be less foodstuffs, less products for everyone, and it leads to a part of more government intervention and government putting out more to people, which is a type of socialism. It is socialism. So we're watching the socialist agenda hit all over the board, and listen to this article as it goes on. But up to this point, most Americans are not feeling too much economic pain, thanks to unprecedented intervention by the federal government. But maybe that's just a teether. Maybe that's just getting us used to something. Unfortunately, that short-term boost of artificial relief is about to wear off. And that's going to cause some major problems as we approach the end of the calendar year. Earlier today, 2 sentences from a BuzzFeed article about the extreme economic despair that is ahead of us really got my attention. The U.S. economy right now is like a jumbo jet that's in a steady glide after both its engines flamed out. In about 6 weeks, it will likely crash into the side of a mountain. I think that's a perfect description of what we're facing, except I would replace U.S. economy with U.S. consumers. The truth is that the economy has already crashed, but consumers have been shielded from the effects of that crash by trillions of dollars in emergency government spending and other unprecedented measures. What's kept us in the air so far is an extraordinary government relief effort. In most states, evictions have been temporarily banned, preventing a mass homelessness crisis. Most federal student loan payments have been put on hold, removing one of the largest recurring monthly expenses that millions of people face in America. Banks were ordered to give their customers a 6-month break on mortgage payments if requested. Most importantly, and counterintuitively, household income sharply increased in April as hundreds of billions of dollars in lost wages were replaced by trillions in government spending. The government sent out more than 159 million stimulus payments of up to $1,200 per adult, more if you have kids, and more than 20 million unemployed people became eligible for an extra $600 a week in federal employment benefits. The result, according to Bloomberg, was the largest monthly increase in household income ever recorded in America. What we have witnessed has been the sudden transfer of wealth that is unlike anything we have ever seen in all of U.S. history. And if you know anything about the transfer of wealth, you take from the haves and you give to the haves-not. That's socialism. And this has allowed most Americans to get through the past few months with not too much of a problem. In fact, many unemployed workers have been bringing home more money than they did when they were actually working. But on July 31st, and here's what we really need to hear, about 6 weeks from now, it's all going to change. The $600 unemployment bonuses are scheduled to end on that date. And President Trump and Republican leaders in Congress have made it clear they have no intention of extending them. In addition, it looks like there will be no more direct checks from the government for ordinary Americans, even if another stimulus bill is passed. So tens of millions of Americans will soon be facing a future in which they are bringing in very little income. In addition, the various bans on evictions around the country will also be coming to an end, as will the grace periods for mortgage payments. Without enough income coming in, a lot of Americans will soon be losing their homes, and this will likely really start ramping up as we head into the holiday season. On top of everything else, the grace period on federal student loans will come to an end at the beginning of October. All I can say is ouch. Basically, all of the economic pain that has been deferred will come rushing back with a vengeance over the next several months. Of course, Congress could delay things a bit more by borrowing and spending trillions of more dollars that we simply don't have. But all of that reckless spending that they have already done has put us in a very perilous territory. Trillions are now whooshing by at a breathtaking pace. And man, if you want to hear anything, just listen to these numbers. The U.S. gross national debt, the total of all Treasury security outstanding, jumped by $1 trillion over the past 5 weeks, from May 4th to June 8th, and by $2.5 trillion for the 11 weeks since March 23rd. The total U.S. outstanding debt has reached $26 trillion, according to the Treasury Department. Now, if you really want to compare that, you're talking about $2.5 trillion over 11 weeks. It took from the founding of the United States until 1981 for the United States national debt to reach its first $1 trillion. And now we've added that same amount to the debt in just 5 weeks. Wow. Our elected officials are absolutely destroying our future, but most Americans don't seem too alarmed by this. Instead, many are clamoring for even more free money because they say that what they have gotten so far is not nearly enough. Socialism gives out crumbs. You take that crumb and now you're depending on getting that crumbs, and you'll never get any bread. You'll just get the crumbs, and that's what's happening. Of course, the federal spending that's already taken place has not had exactly the desired effect. Americans were supposed to take the money they're receiving and spend it. But instead, one recent survey found that most Americans are actually cutting back on their spending right now, saving more money. 34% of survey respondents indicate they've upped their savings rate because of the novel coronavirus. Reducing spending during these turbulent times, 59% of Americans have cut their budgets so that they aren't spending as much money as they did pre-pandemic. No matter how much money Congress showers on the American people, they aren't going to be able to eliminate the overwhelming fear that COVID-19 has created. For the foreseeable future, a large portion of the population is simply not going to resume their normal economic patterns because they're scared of the virus. And in many of our large cities, rioting, looting, and violence has depressed economic activity even further. Congress is able to minimize the discomfort for a little while, but those emergency measures were only intended to help for a short period of time. And in about 6 weeks, the entire country is going to start feeling a tremendous amount of economic pain. So when we're looking at the news, it really isn't something that is warm and cuddling. Let me give you a little bit more moral decay. Sometimes we forget what's happening on that side. Agenda-driven curriculum transforms sex education for students across the country. Now I'm going to give a warning to this. This is a pretty tough content. I have to read it for you, and I'm not really crazy about reading it, but I'm going to read it for you. New Jersey just added anal sex, sodomy, to its learning standard for 8th graders in an 8-4 vote by the State Board of Education. Beginning in 2022, all 8th graders who attend public schools in the Garden State must be proficient in gender identity, gender expression, and sexual orientation. They will work to develop a plan for the school to promote dignity and respect for people of all genders, gender identities, gender expressions, and sexual orientations in the school community. Can you see what's happening? Can you see what's happening all over America? Can you see with the social agenda that's there, the leftist agenda? It is pure evil. And as you see it, it's trying to indoctrinate our children. It's trying to get us dependent on a government. You can see the plan. I mean, anybody with half a brain can understand that all these things are working together. This is nothing new. This is Satan's plan. He's overturning America, and he's trying to the best as he possibly can. The Bible says that when you see these things, look up because your redemption draws nigh. But we're watching the re-education of our children, and all in the sake of saying that you're prejudiced if you don't go along with it. So they're putting us into a corner. It's a brilliant plan, by the way. They're putting us into a corner. Anyone who thinks against sex education for our kids being taught things like this, we're put in a corner. We're dinosaurs. We are prejudiced. We are against everyone. That's not the case. We have morals. We have a standard, and that standard we want to teach our children, and we don't want to be untaught by a government. It goes on to say this: they'll discuss whether and when to engage in sexual behaviors, 8th graders, and factors affecting the ability to give consent to sexual activity. And they'll be taught that abortion should be seen as a positive option. There's an agenda here. High schoolers will be taught how to advocate for community policies that promote transgender identity and expression, all genders and gender expressions, and will analyze the influences of family on the expression of gender, sexual orientation, and identity. It means that they will go against your family if they're against it. In New Jersey, as in most states, all students will be automatically enrolled in all lessons without asking their parents' permission first. Where does that come from? After the vote on June 3rd, Planned Parenthood Action Fund of New Jersey, Answer and Advocates for Youth, issued celebratory statements to the press, I guess they did, thanking the Department of Education for voting in their coalition's recommendations. The guidelines are modeled on the so-called National Sexuality Education Standard, an official sounding creation of Sexual Information Education Council of the U.S. and other big players in the sex ed industry. Today, they partner with Southern Poverty Law Center, the Human Rights Campaign, and Planned Parenthood to transform sex education across the nation. Why would so many big money power players get into the sex education racket? Because sex education is not really about education anymore. According to SICUS, sex ed is for social change. It's a vehicle, I'm quoting, for creating a generation of young people who affirm each other's identities, and a vehicle for racial justice. It's a golden opportunity to create a culture shift on LGBTQ rights, white supremacy, and the reproductive justice, which means abortion. So again, the agendas all start to fit. Sooner or later, you're going to have to see that there's a massive demonic plan that's going on here. When one board member suggested asking parents permission before enrolling kids in these new controversial classes, his idea was dismissed offhand. So we are watching something happen that is quite frightening, but it's quite followable. You can follow the agenda that's here, and you can follow what's going on in America. It's a control for our culture. It's a control to shift us from what we were raised in, and shift America from its values to the values of the liberal left. And let me remind you, the values of the liberal left are not biblical. So let's go on a little bit further and tell you a little bit more. Again, going back to Black Lives Matter, you'll see some controversies that happen here. Strange bedfellows, Black Lives Matter and Planned Parenthood. This is kind of interesting to me. The murder of George Floyd at the hands of the Minneapolis police has brought out huge numbers of people to protest police brutality, which, by the way, they should, and racism, while pledging their solidarity with aggressive African Americans. It has also made for some extremely strange bedfellows. Exhibit A just might be Planned Parenthood and Black Lives Matter. For example, Planned Parenthood advocates for Oregon states, black and brown communities in the United States, I'm quoting, have suffered murder, violence, trauma, and overt and covert racism perpetrated by white people and white-led systems and institutions throughout our country's entire history. This state-sanctioned violence and murder is not new, but it is intolerable and horrific and must stop. Black Lives Matter, end of quote. Meanwhile, Planned Parenthood in Gulf Coast says, quote, the over-policing of black bodies extends far beyond the actions of individual police officers. It is in our workplaces, our schools, our public institutions. It is our healthcare system. It is that same policing of black bodies that makes the promise of reproductive freedom unattainable for so many black people in this country. Now follow this for a moment. The cognitive dissonance of Planned Parenthood attempting to appropriate the racial justice mantle is almost intolerable for those of us who have been fighting for the lives of unborn human beings, unborn black human beings included. Planned Parenthood, after all, was founded by eugenist Margaret Sanger, who said, quote, birth control does not mean contraception indiscriminately practiced. It means the release and cultivation of the better elements in our society and the gradual suppression, elimination, and eventual extinction of defective stocks. In other words, she's saying anybody who's a lesser individual, somebody who has less income, somebody who's not going to make it through society, they're the ones we want to eliminate. She was into killing. And she said, those human weeds, I'm quoting, which threaten the blooming of the finest flowers in American civilization must be eliminated. And just who are these human weeds and these defective stocks? Well, Sanger helpfully gives us a clue as she goes on. The results of the intelligence tests, the menace of indiscriminate immigration, the fertility of the unfit, and the increased burden upon the healthful and vigorous members of American society of the delinquent and dependent classes, together with the growing danger of the abnormal fecundity of the feeble-minded, all emphasize the necessity of clear-sightedness and courage in facing the problem, and throw new light on the possibilities of birth control as a practical and powerful weapon against national racial decadence. She was a bigot. She was prejudiced. She was a bigot and wanted to kill black babies who she called unfit and less human. They are, in her words, immigrants. They're unfit, the delinquent and dependent classes, and the feeble-minded, she called them. She then commends birth control not as a means of rational family planning, but as a powerful weapon against national and racial decadence. Birth control is a weapon against racial minorities. It's amazing to me that Black Lives Matter and Planned Parenthood are even together, because they're totally opposed. In 2014, 36 of all abortions were performed on black women, who are just 13% of the female population, reports the Wall Street Journal. Luke Bobo, a minister from Kansas City, points to what he sees as hypocrisy in the pro-life movement. Those who are the most vocal about abortion and abortion laws are my white brothers and sisters, Bobo says, and yet many of them don't care about the plight of the poor, the plight of the immigrant, the plight of the African Americans. My argument here is, let's think about the entire lifespan of a person. Yes, Planned Parenthood, which seemingly has only one answer, abortion, to every problem faced by African Americans. It's hard to see the answer as anything but a continuation of Margaret Sanger's crusade against the poor and the disadvantaged. We have to ask ourselves how different the plan would be if it were the KKK's plan that Planned Parenthood current policies in African communities. And so again, we're watching that double standard. We're watching that confusion that's happening. Let me give you a little bit more that's happening tonight. This is under your planet. This is behind the cloak of COVID-19. For the past few months, the novel corona pandemic has seemed at times like a cosmic black hole. It has recently consumed everyone's attention, especially in the media, obviously. Turn on your television or your radio, scan the headlines on the web, or swipe through the news on your phone, and COVID-19 often dominates the headlines and discussion, and now it's getting another resurgence. However, behind the ominous, ever-present cloak of the virus, the world is suffering from numerous other calamities. Recent super typhoons have devastated islands in the Pacific. In East Africa, locusts have devastated and devoured what they can eat, and severe flooding has destroyed what crops are left. An unusually severe hurricane season is forecast for the Gulf of Mexico. In the United States, floodwaters are surging over the Midwest, while drought and wildfires are hitting the Southwest. Eastern Europe and Central Russia are already struggling with wildfire, and efforts to suppress the fires are expected to be greatly hampered this year due to measures taken to stem the COVID-19 pandemic. Severe drought in Zimbabwe has resulted in power cuts and a lack of clean water. While the recent unrest, protests, and riots in the United States have been able to break the COVID-19 veil and reach the headlines, the larger picture is that many governments around the world appear to be in crisis. Now, underscore that for a moment. Many governments around the world appear to be in crisis. It's almost like the world is looking for someone to save it. And boy, that's exactly what John the Revelator talks about. He goes on to say this: the larger picture is that many governments appear to be in crisis, further fracturing international relations and disrupting global trade and supply lines. Then there's the ongoing economic impact of the pandemic restrictions themselves, damage that will change the world in ways that can now only be guessed at. And again, let me inject this. When John the Revelator was writing Revelation, he was talking about a worldwide takeover. In order to have a worldwide takeover, it wasn't even possible when he wrote it in 96 AD. A worldwide takeover, the world has to have a crisis, a world crisis. We don't have one world crisis, let me remind you. We have several that are going on right now. Bible prophecies have long warned that signs of the approaching end of the age will continue and include wars and rumors of wars. Listen, there's also the war of words that the United States is waging both against China and Iran. It says there'll be earthquakes in diverse places, famines, pestilences like COVID-19, Ebola, and AIDS, and more, Matthew tells us. As the return of Christ draws near, we will see more such events, only they will get more severe. I know you wanted good news, but I'll give you some at the end. But listen, we are approaching the end of the age, and we are seeing it fastly approach. Let me give you a little bit more of some of the news that you don't necessarily get. This is some of the effects of COVID-19. Cannibal rats are now emerging in our cities. It appears that COVID-19 pandemic has affected more than just people in the economy. New research by the U.S. Center of Disease Control and Prevention is warning of unusual or aggressive behavior in American rats as a consequence of more than 2 months of human lockdown. Urban rats that normally feed on food waste from restaurants and trash in the streets no longer have these food sources available to rely on. Many rats have recently been observed feeding on each other or their own young. The Washington Post reports unusual aggressive behaviors have been noticed in New York City, New Orleans, and Chicago. The hungry rats are beginning to plague cars as they consume engine components, tires, and wire casings, causing fires and costing car owners large sums of money in repairs. Also, detrimental to public health, rats can carry and transmit illnesses such as salmonella. Their urine can also worsen allergies and asthma. Rats can also directly transmit more deadly diseases like hantavirus, hemorrhagic fever, plague, and tularemia, as well as transmit many other diseases indirectly through fleas and ticks. God warned the nations that because of their sins and disobedience, he would not only use other nations to punish them, but also diseases and beasts of the earth. That's in Leviticus 26, 14 to 16, 21 to 25, and Jeremiah 15, 3 and 4. So far, we are not witnessing a rat infestation of biblical proportions. However, we can see from what is happening how such a plague could easily arise in major cities around the globe as a result of removal of regular food sources of these rodents. Man, just listening to the news, just telling you the news, I know that the world needs Jesus. I know that we need God. There is no hope for the world without God. And this is where it's leading to. Let me give you a couple other things that are happening. This one, again, going unnoticed. This is a flyby that happened on June 5th. A stadium-sized asteroid flew by the Earth 12 days ago. While 2020 continues to be a difficult year, it was probably a little good news to look forward to on June 5th because an asteroid came whizzing by the Earth safely, a bit close, and astronomers may be able to see the monster's rock flight through telescopes. The asteroid, known as 2020 NHN4, is approached Earth, but fortunately it missed us. It was a near miss. It flew by the equivalent of 10 times the distance between the Earth and the Moon. By the way, In astronomical terms, that is a hairbreadth. Asteroid 2202 NH4 is more remarkable for its size, with an estimated diameter between 820 and 1,890 feet, a stadium. It's more than a dozen times larger than the object that stands in the atmosphere above Chernobyl, Russia in 2013. And the asteroid is quite huge. And if it had hit the Earth, its immediate effect would be lights out for 1/3 of the planet. So it was a near miss. Here's the thing that really caught me about this article. NASA and a network of partner telescopes regularly scan the skies for potential threatening near-Earth asteroids, NEOs. But there's 17,000 big near-Earth asteroids that remain undetected. So when you read about Wormwood, that is an asteroid that's coming in, and it's probably one of those 17,000. Let me give you a little bit more, some good news for you. I know you need that tonight. This one is heavier tools in store for religious freedom. President Trump steps up to the plate. One News Now has continually reported on the rampant persecution against people of faith in countries like North Korea, Pakistan, and China. America has been able to do very little about this in the past, but now President Trump has issued an executive order on advancing international religious freedom. An order that has some teeth in it. We're going to get a lot more training for our diplomatic corps with this executive order, he asserts. It's going to include a lot heavier tools for religious freedom violators and persecutors. That includes visa restrictions and potential economic sanctions on either countries or individuals who perpetrate these actions. And lastly tonight, one more piece of good news. It's good to see the American flag. This is, do you feel like things are spiraling out of control? Doesn't sound like good, but listen to it. Do you feel like America is spiraling out of control? The chaos and disorder seems to be the new order of the day? That you have no idea what tomorrow might bring? That those in leadership of our nation, from the president to law enforcement and from medical specialists to the local mayors, are in over their heads? If so, you're not alone. A new poll indicates that 80% of voters say things are out of control in the United States. 80%. 8 out of 10, with majorities still concerned about the spread of the coronavirus, pessimistic about the economy's returning to normal before next year, and down on President Trump's ability to unite the nation. Well, out of control, that's America in 2020. This is Murray's article. Said Democratic pollster Jeff Horowitz of Heart Research Association, who helped conduct a survey with Republican pollster Bill McInturff and his GOP colleagues on the public opinion strategies. Think about it for a moment. Do you have much confidence in what medical experts are telling us? Do you feel sure that they know what's best? It seems like not even the hindsight is 2020 these days. How about the shutdown? Was it justified? Or an overreaction? Or were there more sinister plans behind it? What about decisions being made by state and city officials, including governors and mayors? Do you feel like they are in over their heads? What about the riots? Will they subside in the coming days, or will they come up to your own neighborhood? How do you feel about some of the solutions being proposed, including defunding the police? Does the thought of it make us nervous? And what about President Trump? Do you feel that he has a grip on how best to handle our crises, the likes of which no president in history has ever faced before at once? Even the staunchest Trump supporter must realize that nothing prepared him or any other national leader for a moment quite like this. The simple truth is that America needs God, and whichever way we turn, we find only partial solutions. No matter who wins the next election, we will remain deeply divided, barring divine intervention. Even if the protests soon subside, the scars will last for many years to come. And how long will it take to rebuild and restore what has been burned down and looted and destroyed? Even as for the virus, even if we successfully win the long-term battle, if we do live the long-term battle, it is unlikely that normal life will return to what we were previously used to for a long time. And how many businesses, small and large alike, have been forced to shut their doors for good? And what about all those families still grieving their loved ones that were killed by COVID-19? At times like this, our president, along with every single one of us, would do well to remember the words reportedly uttered by President Abraham Lincoln. I have been driven many times to my knees by the overwhelming conflictions that I had nowhere else to go. My own wisdom and those around me seem insufficient. That's the perfect place for us to start, on our knees, in dependence on God, asking Him to give us wisdom for the day. This doesn't mean that we don't take action. It doesn't mean that we sit back and rely on a miracle. But it does mean that, at such times as this, we don't fool ourselves into putting a multitude of band-aids on a critically ill patient. Without divine intervention, America is in deep trouble. But if we all cry out for mercy, no, desperately plead for mercy, and give ourselves unconditionally to the agents of hope and healing, then all things are possible. Things certainly are spiraling out of control. It's high time that we appeal to the only one who can set things right. There is a time when even the proudest among us must bow our knee. Now is such a time. And as I close tonight in the news, let me appeal to all of you. If you're taking sides tonight, The only side you really need to take is the side of Christ. You need to be someone who purports peace. You don't need to be somebody who continues the divide. Satan is the great divider. God is the great adder. Satan is the one who wants to cause trouble. God is the one who wants to heal. The Bible says, blessed are the peacemakers. So I'm going to ask you, whatever you're doing tonight, whatever cause you're fighting, whether it's Black Lives Matter, whether it's some other cause that you have, are you promoting peace? Are you promoting the message of Jesus Christ? That is what a Christian is supposed to do. So if you call yourself a Christian tonight, check where you are, check where you sleep, check where you sit, check what you say, check the fact that you must be promoting peace, not promoting violence, not promoting an agenda. And I appeal to you, if you're a Christian, understand that you are of a different country. You're of a different kingdom. Your kingdom is one of peace. It's not one of turmoil. Don't jump into the mix. Don't be in the dog-eat-dog world. Yes, support the things that are right, but please support the cause of Christ, because that is the only answer for America. Let's pray. Father, I thank you tonight. I thank you for in the news. Even though it's hard to hear times, Lord God, we know prophecy tells us that it's all boiling down to a bottleneck. We understand, Lord God, that you're coming back. And I pray tonight, Lord God, that the church rise, the sleeping giant rise, Lord God, that we do what we're called to do, not only promote peace, but to promote Christ. Lord, not to get into scuffles and arguments, Lord God, but to give what you gave, the peace and compassion to love every individual. Bless us tonight, Lord God. Bless all that have heard it. In Jesus' name, amen. We'll be back in a moment. Some of you have asked how you can support us. We don't have it on the screen, but it's Mark Correll Ministries, P.O. Box 829, Pell City, Alabama, and I think that's 35215 if I'm not mistaken. No, it's 35125. Thank you. So if you want to do that, please, you can do that. Thank you so much. We'll be back in a moment with our study.